Alright, hello YouTube, Anthony here, and today we're going to be discussing some major scripts on the side of Digital Foundry who have recently looked into Crysis 3 on Nintendo Switch, and it's just kind of a mess. Let's go and get into this. So here we have a looped version of the video playing without audio, so I can talk over it, of course, constantly. And here we have the walk, as I call it. This is a level called Into the Jungle in Crysis 3, as seen on PS3, and as seen on the alleged Gold Master code, which will be seen on the Nintendo Switch, allegedly. This Digital Foundry, maybe they made a mistake here with what they were saying. Maybe this is true. I don't really know. Ultimately, all I know is what they tell us through their videos. So, here we have the PS3 version and the Nintendo Switch version side by side. And you can see a lot of the same things are happening on screen. You see the same buildings, the same coloration, looks like the same sort of tone mapping is being used. You know, about the same level of detail. You can see a little bit of pop in the grass and on the shadows. You can see that there was that deer that walked across the grass and was casting some shadow onto it. That didn't appear to happen on the Nintendo Switch side of things. Digital Foundry did not discuss that. The grass appears to be actually a higher quality on the PlayStation 3 than it does on the Nintendo Switch. And also some of the trees. Now, I haven't really noticed this in this particular shot, or these two opening shots here that we are comparing, but ultimately the game does look a little bit better on the PS3. Look at these shadows that are coming up under the text on the PS3 version, which they threw up over the screen, so you can't see the shadows as well, but you can definitely see still through this semi-transparent gray box that they put around their text that indeed there is more stuff going on the PS3 side as far as shading is concerned, and that takes geometry. How shadow maps work is not entirely clear to me. I'm pretty sure there's like a geometry masking sort of technique. Look at the grass here. There's some blockiness on the Nintendo Switch side of things, which is a little bit strange, you know, especially considering textures elsewhere are somewhat better according to them, and they do show a point where the textures actually are improved on the Nintendo Switch version, which we will also see in this long extended clip that is playing at 0.25%, speed. Or it is to 25% speed. The thing here is that ultimately, and as you will start seeing, like here, there's just more shading that is happening. Sunlight is actually filtering through the scene more realistically on the PS3 side of things, and you can see that is very apparent. We already passed the area, I think, where the grass popped in on the Nintendo Switch side of things. And it's just pretty ridiculous. Digital Foundry, here we have another scene where Digital Foundry can't account for the grass that's popping in on the Switch side of things. Look at the helicopter shadow. It's doing the same thing that you saw on the PS3. It's just kind of going, here I am. Oh, nope. The helicopter was here when I last updated. That's sort of happening, or it is happening, exactly the same on the Nintendo Switch side of things. And, if the system were that much more powerful, we should be seeing less popping on grass, actually no popping, because basically the PS3 is not getting any popping on grass. I'm sure there might be some places where you see popping on grass, but we're not seeing it here. And this is where things look to turn around. Now, I previously said that the Switch is drawing stuff in a lot sooner, and that appears to still possibly be the case. I mean, you see the tree branch actually, materialize before it does on the PS3 side of things. But at the same time, I'm not entirely sure if these segments are actually aligned properly, because you do see some points where things do appear to be out of sync, which is kind of weird. It's a little bit strange. I'm not entirely sure what's going on with that. Maybe the animation is playing a little bit differently between runs. Maybe, there's some squashing and stretching of the the level itself a little bit on the Nintendo Switch, or it's just different between the PS3 and the Nintendo Switch here. I really, honestly, I don't know why. There's a little bit of desynchronization between the two versions there. Now we have this portion here where you literally see that overhead object is clipping through a post in the far background on the left side of the screen, and it's not on the PS3 side of things. Why is the orientation of this object slightly different on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox or Nintendo Switch? I have no idea. But there it is. And on the PS3 side of things, it's not clipping through anything, at least not that we can see here. Don't know. Now, there does seem to be slightly better anisotroping filtering on the Nintendo Switch, which you can pretty much see on the hand in every shot to some extent. But otherwise, yeah, this is looking very much identical between the two versions. There's not much to pull them apart here, with the exception of the grass and the shadows being cast onto the grass also popping in as well. You may also have noticed that. I didn't really get to talk about it. This is actually still moving a little bit too fast for me to apparently get all my thoughts out in quick succession, which is just a little bit ridiculous because we're really only supposed to be talking about these small little differences. There's like 5 differences that actually make the PS3 version better. But I'm not even sure we're going to be able to see all of them just on the footage that Digital Foundry provided to compare us. Compare these two versions against, for us to compare everything. So, yeah, I mean, it does look like everything is very similar, but the Nintendo Switch is having some problems handling finer geometry, or, the same amount of geometry, which we saw in, when I actually compared Tomb Raider on the Tegra X1 powered NVIDIA Shield TV against the PS3 version of the game. We're seeing the same thing happening here. All the major stuff is still rendering in at the same sort of distance, though. I guess because there is so much foliage and grass and stuff, the developers who are now focused on performance decide to see, the game render at a higher frame rate rather than with higher fidelity visuals. So here we see those two buildings. In between those two buildings, we'll see on both sides new buildings pop in the background. They pop up. There they are, 1 and 2. Or did the second one pop up? I think, yeah, that's, I think, everything. So you can see some geometry. It's popping up at the same time, more or less, at the exact same points. I mean, if there's a few millimeters or meters even of difference, it's not a huge thing. But if it's like, if you gotta be, well, I guess a meter within a meter, we should say. It's a few millimeters to a couple of centimeters. That's not, any real difference in variation. Now, if we're talking dozens of meters difference between how LODs are handled, on-screen object size is very different between the PlayStation 3 and the Nintendo Switch. and it favors Nintendo Switch, then I would say so. And originally in my comments that I've been writing under the original Digital Foundry video, I've basically been saying that it does look like the Nintendo Switch is handling certain laws better than on PS3, but after reviewing it frame by frame, over and over and over and over and over and over again, I mean, look at even the ground. You see that there are clouds being cast dynamically across the ground on the PlayStation 3 side of things. Now, Digital Foundry did mention the skybox. It looks a little bit less cloudy. That seems to be a design choice, you know, an artistic decision. But if you actually pay attention to these fine little details by watching these things over and over and over again, it does appear that actually what's going on is they cleared up the skybox because there is no dynamic cloud shadows being cast. And I think that's really what the difference is with that. And they do their best to try to make sure that these differences aren't as visible, I think, maybe. But you can see even here on the PS3 side of things that the environment just gets a little bit darker and then it gets a little bit lighter. Even at this very slow speed, you can see that happening. Now, here on the Switch side of things, they're trying to show off the grass being fuller. You know, there's more grass according to John Linneman, but it's just fuller looking grass. The same amount of grass is being rendered. You can even see in the lower left-hand corner of the screen under the railing there, you know, between the map and everything. On the PS3 side, it's still there. It's just finer looking grass blades. And up close, they're finer looking anyway, because they don't have that weird blockiness that you see on the Nintendo Switch side of things. Now, I'm not sure what's going on there. Now, here's where they point out better textures, and fair point, the Nintendo Switch has better looking textures here. I'm not sure what the deal is with that, but ultimately that is what's happening. We see the evidence. It is, you know, very obvious that the Nintendo Switch is getting better looking textures here. So point awarded to the Nintendo Switch. Better textures, better performance, you know, higher resolution with TAA. Those are all great things. You get better image quality, you know, overall, all around, better performance. Those are two major things in its favor, but we're talking about a system that launched in 2017. That's a full 11 years after the PlayStation 3 launched. Well, you know, not a full, but it's 10 plus years after the PlayStation 3 launched. And the game itself is coming to the Nintendo Switch within the next few weeks or so. Here's another huge one. They're talking about ambient occlusion, but look at the shadows on the ground. Look at the PS3 version. Now look at the Switch version. Now look at the PS3 version again, which will pop up. You see any difference here? Look at all that fine detail on the ground that is just absent here on the Nintendo Switch side. That's the difference. That takes geometry. It takes extra processing power that the Nintendo Switch just doesn't have. It doesn't have it. The PS3 does, and this was the worst performing version, which is probably why Digital Foundry rolled this version out to compare against the Switch, because they thought it would be favorable. Not only that, but there's a huge disparity between the resolution that's being offered. Nintendo Switch is actually rendering like 1.92 or 1.95 or some crazy, ridiculously high, you know, percentage value above the PlayStation 3 version of this game. There's just so much more pixels that are being rendered per frame than on the PS3 side of things. And yet the game still has clearly much better, finer detail in the image. And that's just because the quality settings are set just a little bit higher on the PS3, you know? And again, we still see stuff in the background. Look at the buildings, you know, they do appear a little bit darker, and maybe that's because they started getting bathed in clouds a little bit on the PS3 side of things. Again, that was a pretty short clip, and it's even shorter, of course, when you're playing it at full speed, which is, you know, technically, I guess, 3 times faster than this, or my math might be wrong on that front. It's like we're playing it at 25% speed, so, you know, this is quarter speed. There you go. So the full speed is actually like 4 times faster than this. It's ridiculous. We've already kind of talked about all the major differences between the PS3 version and the Nintendo Switch version, and this isn't even really halfway done. We did excise a large portion of this video to actually play back And this is technically full resolution. This is 1080p by 1980 by 1080 resolution here, this whole frame. And the way that I'm viewing it is a frame within a frame, because I'm actually viewing it on my cell phone as I comment on it. And ultimately, the difference here is still rather incredible. Even in the dark, um, on a very small screen, these differences are still apparent. And maybe that's because I've watched this so many times that I'm seeing them, but I had to initially just go back and forth, and zoom in on things and, look at it on the big screen and stuff like that. And even then, you still zoom in on stuff, and it's like, these versions are pretty much identical. Like here, the Nintendo Switch, they get like one extra building in the far distance, if you could see that. And that's like the difference. It's like, if that's the difference, you know, and you only see this like once, right? Like in the tunnel, you see stuff that appears to definitely be drawing in sooner on the Nintendo Switch, but the full quality isn't really any different. And then here, you just have that constant one extra building in the background that you can see on the right hand side of the Nintendo Switch screen. And it doesn't appear to be there on the PS3 side of things. It really doesn't look like it's there at all. Just it's missing. It's missing in action, a whole building. And this isn't like a change in the FOV or anything. Like the same field of view seems to be used across both games. But it's just missing that building, it looks like. You got the buildings, those two landmarks that are around. They surround that building, but not that one in the center, And some people might say that, that's a huge win in favor of the Nintendo Switch, but it's like, I don't really see how. I think the bigger win is the image quality enhancement and the performance enhancement. And this, of course, is all docked mode performance. If you want to discuss how this game plays in portable mode, well, we don't know. But here we have another scene with tons and tons of grass. Now, this is actually the comparison between the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 version, as you can see, and that's why they both look pretty much identical. And you can see here in the PS3 and Xbox 360 version, the dynamic rolling cloud shader that is applied across the entire landscape. Now, I'm not entirely sure how these sorts of really, crazy sort of shadow effects are applied to the entire environment. I do believe it's got to be some sort of crazy masking effect rather than like real geometry or anything like that, because I think that would just be too complicated on the system. But maybe they are actually doing something like that and it's not like some sort of color mask. I honestly, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. But you can see it's being deployed liberally here in this field. You see it gets darker and lighter and darker and lighter, and that's like a constant theme of this game. Like you see the clouds rolling in over dilapidated New York that's taken over by these creatures, which I can't remember the name of, despite how many times I've actually played this game. You do see how like shiny this rusty train is, which is pretty funny to say. Like when he jumps up, you can actually see there's a lot of shininess on that. Where it isn't completely rusted, it's very shiny. Then we have again this scene. Now this scene compares the PS3 and Xbox 360 as the train car, the fuel car, actually rolls down the hill. And you can see there's pretty much no pop-in. What you see is the shadow from the helicopter move across the screen. It's the same place. Then you see a couple of bushes, but you don't see like any mass quantities of grass. You don't see, any huge amount of pop-in. You do see stuff on the left-hand side of that wall there. That pops in. Some minor decals are being, drawn in as you get really close to them. But it's nothing like on the Switch version where the grass is just, oh, hang on, we don't have, this tall portion here. We don't have this tall portion there. And then, of course, they, draw in the shadows around them after the grass has popped up as well. So there's a huge difference to the rendering, of the geometry that's on screen. and how much detail is actually visible on screen. It's just these tiny little things, they're not massive, but it does show that there is still a weakness on the Nintendo Switch. And these are weaknesses that have held throughout the entire generation. The longevity of the Tegra X1 hardware, and really mobile hardware in general, is they don't focus much of that extra compute performance on rendering geometry. They focus more on rendering pixels. It's all about that fill rate, because all these tiny little phone screens, like the one I'm using right now to review this video, is actually higher resolution than the display that I would connect my PS4 to. And, it's a higher resolution display than my PC has built in, because it's a laptop. And of course, it's stuff like that. GPUs, despite being weak on mobile, they have to actually render those pixels. And in that regard, they are actually better, in like for like sort of situations compared to older GPUs, which were focused, especially in the gaming space, on rendering triangles, and texturing them. You have to remember these things. You have to know these things to actually make those sorts of comparisons, and a lot of people don't. They think that the reason why the PlayStation Vita maybe not have, wasn't able to push the same sort of quality as the PS3 is just because it was a weaker GPU. And it's like, there is that, to consider. But even if the GPU was more powerful, like in the case of the Nintendo Switch, with the Tegra X1, it's still not able to push the same level of geometry. And the reason for that is not because it's a weaker GPU, but because its power is focused elsewhere. It's focused on pushing a high number of pixels, not a high number of geometry, not a high number of triangles. And that's the problem. It might have more RAM available to it and all of that, and it can still texture geometry better than, the PS3 ever could because of that. But what they're doing with, just 256 megabytes of video RAM on the PS3, I mean, look at this image. I don't understand why the image quality is so close between the Nintendo Switch and the PlayStation 3. Like the overall sensation is like we're looking at the exact same game, right? And especially if like the first time that you're looking at this, you're looking at, PS3 footage through a tiny window within a window on a tiny little screen, and with like the lowest brightness setting, so you can record in the highest quality available without turning your phone into, a firecracker. But it's like, what's going on? What is happening here? What's happening here is that the Nintendo Switch it really isn't capable of doing the stuff that a lot of people think it is. And that's what's really happening here. So you have to consider the differences. And, that's just, we didn't see this scene in the comparison with the Switch version. We only saw the PS3 version. And that's kind of disappointing, because we do have like a lot of water here in one of these scenes. This one right here, yeah, it's, I'm not lying when I say it's dark. As I'm viewing this scene does have a lot of water. I just can't really see it. Okay, so, but I do remember there being a lot of water in this scene. And, of course, when you play through it on the PS3, it's like, when you play through it on the PC for the first time at 60 frames per second, or very close to it, because my laptop is still not powerful enough to run this game in, the original version. Look at how much brighter the Nintendo Switch side of things is. That's because that rolling cloud simulation is gone. It's so bright out here, but everywhere else it looks so close. Like, in any situation where the lighting is kind of fixed, it looks very similar. But here you see those rolling clouds, and it produces a very different effect. And I think that's, again, because the Nintendo Switch just, overall, they had to cut some things out to get it to run at 30 FPS. And even though it's running at 30 FPS, here I don't think they talk about the frame pacing issues. I'm not sure if they even show any issues with the frame pacing on the Nintendo Switch. There it is. We have like a frame time spike there on the Nintendo Switch side of things. So yeah, there are some pretty obvious frame pacing issues on the Nintendo Switch side of things, which still mar the performance a little bit, or at least it mars the fluidity according to Digital Foundry. In my personal experience, I didn't really care. I played the PS3 game, I made it through, on, I guess, Delta difficulty without any real issues, and then of course I made it through on the PC side of things without any real issues. I'm not sure if my save games still exist on PC because, well, PC just has a weird way of handling save games. For me, look at the train car. It gets like shadowed way differently than the Nintendo Switch. It's just a block of shade on the Switch, and you have all that fine detail coming through from the sun, casting through the leaves and everything. That just doesn't exist on the Switch version. I mean, it exists in the, the crepuscular ray effect, but it doesn't exist, in the actual level of detail that we're seeing cast on the ground. And really, I think that's all I have to say about this. I mean, I could let this play longer, but I really don't think we need to. And I'm pretty sure it's actually supposed to end at some point really near here anyway. So I will go ahead and say that another thing is particle shadows. Yeah, actually, we can't just discuss one thing. There it is. That's the Switch version. Those particles look really bright. Alright, well, with that, I think we're done, really. Nintendo Switch is just, it's weak. It can't even run these last-gen games as well as it can run... well, it is running it better, so I guess their performance is better. You can tell that I'm doing this completely off the cuff without a script, because I have to, change a little bit of fine detail here and there, but ultimately you can see that the Nintendo Switch version of this game, it doesn't look as good. It's just ever so slightly worse. And that despite being on much more powerful hardware, allegedly. And now they discuss Doom. So, yeah, this is how you know it really is that Digital Foundry video. And of course it's dock mode. But anyway, yeah, that it really is everything that I have to say about this. So if you like what you have heard, that's great. Maybe give this video a like, boost it in the algorithm a little bit. Other than that, that's really all I have to say about this. Digital Foundry is not being completely honest. Maybe they're kissing, Crytek's butt here. I'll be really interesting. I am interested in hearing what other people have to say about this and what they think about what they're seeing here. There are not too many people in the comment sections under their video that are actually talking, smack about Digital Foundry. So, I think they do need to be called out for this, because this is not good. Keep it respectful, but this is something that they need to stop doing. The Switch is weaker. That needs to be said. This game does not actually perform, well, it does perform favorably, but it doesn't actually look better, than it does on PS3. And that's something that we do have to keep in mind. So, yeah, this doesn't diminish from the hard work that the developer has done in any way, shape, or form. This is really, really quite difficult to do, But, I mean, I have trouble just making one little program that makes triangles, move around in 3D space and stuff. But, to get all of this stuff to work like they're doing on this hardware that's this limited, I'm not diminishing the developers' efforts, but we have to consider the hardware, and we do have to consider, the developers' new focus on performance over graphical fidelity as well. All of these things do play a role. And with that being said, I think I really truly am done this time. Okay, so this is Anthony, discussing Nintendo Switch and PlayStation 3 and the real performance differences between the systems, and Digital Foundry lying about that. All right, bye.